Hi, my name is Stephanie. Thank you for joining us today for Service Taxonomy Essentials. Few quick notes. We are recording the event today, so all attendees will receive an email from me no later than tomorrow lunchtime with a link to download both the recording and the webinar slides. If you have any questions today for our presenters, Don and Jeff, we ask that you use the Q&A panel as your phone lines have been muted. To access the Q&A panel, please use the blue icon in the top right-hand corner with a question mark and type your questions in. One last note, we do have a demo later, and it may be helpful to be in the full screen mode for this demo. You can go full screen in WebEx by using the double arrows that are located above and to the right of the slide that you currently see on your screen. So use the double arrows or the plus and minus to adjust your screen viewing there. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen Systems.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me today as a co-presenter is Jeff Benedict, who heads up our ITSM practice and is an excellent solutions architect to boot. I'm one slide behind. Okay. So here's our agenda today. If you're new to our series, welcome. If you're a past attendee, thanks for joining us again. Our goal always is to share valuable information and insights you can use in your planning and activities right now. The topic we'll explore today is who are the customers and what are the services? After a very little bit about Evergreen, we'll dive into our topic, which sounds simple enough, but there's quite a lot going on here under the covers. Beyond that, we'll briefly demonstrate our always evolving view of a very advanced self-service catalog and user experience built on ServiceNow. Then we'll answer some questions if you have any. Evergreen is a US-based consulting firm, and we've worked with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000 companies and public sector organizations to help them improve their IT service management execution. We're a full lifecycle firm, or as one customer said, you have both process and technology in one company. We're one of the top 5 US ServiceNow partners and have over a decade of domain experience in each area of the ServiceNow portfolio. But we view all of this from the perspective of what we call customer-centric IT service management. At Evergreen, we think that conventional ITSM wisdom is wrong. It's been done the same old way for the past decade, incident, problem, change, and a little bit of knowledge. At the end of it, we may be running a little bit better, but so what? What about the customer? Are we making a difference for them? Are we delivering any more value? Or are we waiting to phase 2 or 3 to even think about them? This old model is broken. If you're considering moving to ServiceNow or any other platform for that matter, I think you should demand more. You need to start with the customer in phase 1, and you absolutely can deliver a big customer experience improvement in that phase. One that your customers and the CIO will notice. And if you're already a couple of years into your latest ITSM journey, even more importantly, now's the time to get going on this. For the past 2 years at Evergreen, this is what we've been focused on, working very hard from the customer in, not IT out, with IT and the customer evolving together from the start. Let me share a short story. Last November 2014, we were contacted by a prospective new client who had been using ServiceNow for 2 years with little to not much to show for it. She wanted to dramatically change her employees' IT experience by year end. On New Year's Eve, she was live with a beautiful new employee self-service portal and told us it was the most impactful IT project of the year. She should know she's the CIO. On to our topic today. Let's start with the challenge. It's very hard to coordinate services across the IT organization from request to outcome. Each silo in IT has hundreds of tools and processes refined over years to manage and deliver their specific outcomes. The work itself is often very complex and substantially undocumented, and tribal knowledge plays a significant role in getting the work done. Each silo is the same in nature, but the tools, processes, and knowledge are unique silo to silo. Layer on top of that a potentially complex organizational structure in IT with lines of authority that can sometimes overlap. So IT service coordination is hard. But unfortunately, your customers really don't care about that. It's not that they're unfeeling. As customers, they aren't supposed to care. You're the seller and they're the buyer. What do they want? They want an experience that is simple, beautiful, complete, predictive, and leading. And they want that complete end-to-end experience to be excellent and delivered on or before you promised every time. Pretty high standard. So thinking about services, what does it take to deliver a complete, great service experience consistently? Doing so involves three constituencies, and those who have been on webinars before with us have seen this slide. It continues to evolve as well. The customer, the providers, and the managers all must be involved and have their needs met to create a truly viable service. The customer wants an excellent customer experience. To deliver that, we must think like the customer and design from the customer in, not IT out, or they will reject it. The provider wants execution effectiveness, and if we don't build in a way that it makes them more efficient and effective, then they won't support the change with the customers and will work around the system. The manager wants governance and accountability. Without these, we cannot deliver a service consistently with high quality. So that gives us an idea of the challenge that we have in front of us. There is some good news. Most importantly, you are delivering these end-to-end services to customers today. They may be complex, manual, and difficult to measure and manage, but you're doing it, perhaps in the hardest way possible. Next, we're not creating anything new to add to your workload. It is work you're already doing. Because of poor process, limited workflow, and limited automation for most organizations, the people are the process. The people are the workflow. If we follow 80-20 thinking, and in most cases it applies, if it's accurate for you, then 5 to 10 high-volume, repetitive tasks make up 80% of your effort. These are what we focus on for simplification, automation, and elimination. They are quite literally not worth your brain power. Then you can focus on what is worth it, the challenging, complex problems where you do have to think. Who is the customer? Remember this key phrase. Everyone has services, everyone has customers. The outcomes you deliver over and over are services to someone. The people asking for them are your customer. As you go down the services rather than silos path, it can get confusing, and as simple as this sounds, the two questions that are the title of this webinar can be very clarifying. Who is the customer, and what is the service? You can ask them over and over again. And they can spin off correlate questions that will help you, like, would the customer care about this? And is this service exactly what they want? Customers beget other customers. Consider the notion of a mobile app for an end customer. In this example, a network technician is providing connectivity as a service, and his customer is the developer who is creating the application. The developer creates the application as a service for her customer, who is the line of business. And the line of business employees provide the application as a part of their overall service delivery to their customers. What are the services? Here's another example where services are combined to deliver a complex service. Here we see a server administrator performing the service of installing a server in support of a CRM application for his customer, the CRM app owner. The CRM app owner, in turn, provides the CRM system as a service to one of their customers, the training department. They use the system in combination with an instructor and other components to deliver the service sales training to their customer, the sales team. Then Dwight Schrute, a salesperson, combines all these elements to provide what you can call a service, a sales call, to his customer. So let's take a little bit of a look at what makes up a service. This is an example of an IT service for a line of business. The services that finance provides using this include things like collecting cash through accounts receivable, buying goods and services, and paying accounts payable. If we dig a little deeper into what makes a good service, let's say, for example, that I'm the customer. Here we have an IT service we call SAP Financials, which includes the financial software from SAP. It might have other things as well from IT, or it might just be this, depending upon what we're delivering. We have a description, the core functionality offered, so I can decide if it is what I'm looking for. Perhaps there are also different user roles who see different functionality. For example, from lightweight users to sort of heavy-duty users. I can see that James Vitolo is the service owner if I need to contact someone about it, and I can see that it's rated 4 out of 5 stars for quality. I can also click on the Request This Service button on the upper right-hand side if I decide I want it. A good service design goal is to provide a simple but complete description of the service and its attributes to the point where a customer can make a self-service determination. It's not always possible, but it's a pretty good target. So now we're going to talk about a service taxonomy. You can see how the layering of services and customers can quickly give rise to a large number of services and combination of services. As the providers, you can also see how it could be very easy to get lost in that volume. This is where a taxonomy can help us and can help our customers. A taxonomy is a logical, repeatable way to classify the services we offer, as well as the ones we might want to offer. The taxonomy here of Homo sapiens is a pretty good type of taxonomy model for IT services. The classification goes from very broad to specific, from millions to few. The 100-year-old Dewey Decimal System is a good taxonomy example as well, and is still in use today at over 200,000 libraries. Could you imagine trying to find a book or manage a library without it? So a taxonomy is a logical and extensible way of classifying things. Most taxonomies organize things into logical categories, groups, and even subgroups as it gets more and more specific. They don't have to be hierarchical groups. They could be alphabetic listings of things as well. The best type of taxonomy for you is the type that is most useful in creating and managing the services you want to offer. It is also very helpful, if the taxonomy includes or carries with it the principles of classification in the framework itself. One common way to do this is to use self-defining terms. That is, terms that are generally understood by a high percentage of the target customer to be the same thing for that group of services. And here's an example. The term high-powered desktop computer is more self-defining than compute hardware 64-bit Linux OS v5. At the highest level, the framework should capture the broadest view of what you see as potentially within the scope of the effort. Of course, the taxonomy can be grown or shrunk later. It's never truly locked down, but it is easier to start with a broad view as there's no downside to it. You don't have to use all of it right away, and you will minimize any reclassification efforts you might face downstream that could come from changing the taxonomy. The parts of a taxonomy are meant to be parts of a whole. It is one taxonomy. Here's a simple example of a broad framework, and you can see we've got up here in the upper left-hand side, line of business services, shared services, lower right, and a couple of different categories of IT services. So if we drill down a little bit, here we're looking one level deeper in line of business, which generally or generically could include things like sales and marketing, R&D, production, professional services, and finance, for example. In practice, your line of business services will be much more specific according to the industry that you're in. Shared services tend to be more common in nature across industries and often include facilities, communications, travel, procurement, HR, and so on. As mentioned, we do break IT services into two groups, customer-facing and internal IT. You don't have to follow this convention. These are often mixed together, but it can be very confusing for the customers that are trying to use the services. Here you also see one of our service taxonomy principles at play, and that is this. The taxonomy labels are for the customer, and the framework is for the providers. A service can be presented to a customer many different ways. It may be in a what's new flashing icon, or in a list of people who like this, also like this kind of services. It isn't just found by drilling down on the taxonomy. But any section of a taxonomy is targeted at a particular customer set. And since we want to think like the customer, then the labels in that section should be in the customer's language, not the provider's. Beyond that, the labels in the taxonomy will certainly be visible a number of different places, so they have to make sense to the customer. If you look at the two categories above, you can see the difference in the labels for the two groups. What do we mean when we say the framework is for the providers? It's the way the providers can understand the breadth and depth of services and combinations of services offered. Let's say you have 300 services. Could you really understand a numbered or alphabetical list of them? It would be too hard. What about combinations to yield a complex service? Then it becomes impossible. So the framework is for the providers to help understand the services and combinations offered logically, to avoid creating redundant services, to better combine existing services, and to ensure that services are aligned with the right customer. So here we look at extending the taxonomy in the area of mobile services. We can see how the labels are customer-friendly, common sense terms for that target customer. And I'm assuming that they know what BYOD is. If not, we should spell that out. And at the edge of the taxonomy, we can see that the services we might offer, like mobile bundles of basic, medium, or advanced, or service activities like add, update, or remove, hang right off the framework. At this detail level, there's another key benefit for the provider. We can better see what services we might be missing in one area by visually comparing it to another area. And we can also see how one service might connect to another. Here are some of the best practices for organizing and managing customers. These go hand in hand with best practices for organizing and managing services, which is the next slide. I've broken them into 3 phases just to help show logical progression and evolution. In the first phase, we're setting a foundation for customer interaction with the beautiful basic customer service portal. This becomes the heart of interaction between providers and customers. And I didn't say IT and customers, I said providers and customers. So we want to think about ourselves as providers. We also define our first version of our service taxonomy at a high level for areas not used yet, and a deeper level in the usual starting place, which is most often IT's external customers. Phase 2 sees our primary focus on bringing IT itself into the customer portal. Here we are asking, what are the services? And the answer is the kinds of services knowledgeable IT workers would consume. Knowing that, we can then ask, who are the customers? And this is where the questions help. And the answer is the employees of IT and any other IT-centric employees in another group, which could be, for example, a systems developer in a line of business. This is a nice example of that. Phase 2 may also see us beginning to focus on shared services as a customer, perhaps with a pilot activity. In Phase 3, you can see shared services being brought on as a full-fledged customer and the possibility of piloting services for the line of business. So you can see how it unfolds and expands over time. Okay, so the density of the slide violates all presentation principles. I wouldn't call it simple, beautiful, but it definitely is complete. I built it to serve as a sort of a one-slide checklist or a guide for organizing and managing services. So I know it's awful, but here it is. I'll hit the highlights. Phase 1 focuses on creating initial services for our portal to give our customers some value, but also to get IT working in a customer services mindset rather than a siloed technical mindset. These services are individually hand-built and are kept to a small number because we haven't put in place our process for building and managing services in a factory-like manner. An analogy is that of an automaker building a half dozen prototypes of a new model by hand before going into full production. Here we also create and use our service design package V1.0 so that at least our hand-built services have design consistency. Phase 2 is the big foundation phase. Here we put in place our service portfolio or service factory for the lifecycle management of services, from idea to design and build to production to changes to retirement. Here, as in every other phase, we improve existing services and add new ones. As part of our factory, we also put in place governance and management, as well as the roles and responsibilities needed to run well from a services perspective. Here's something worth noting. Phase 2 is also where we get serious about service costing and using the CMDB to identify the full service. Phase 3 is where we deliver true production volume of services and focus intently on simplifying and automating existing services that are already in place. The other major Phase 3 target is to start putting in robust service health monitoring, integrating the CMDB and event management. So much for that chunky slide. Here's another simple way to see the 3 phases in a generic customer-centric services roadmap. We've classified the phases by color, and of course they're not the same for everyone, but this is just a common example, with blue being phase 1, orange phase 2, and purple phase 3. If you look at the blue line right down the middle, above the line is what the customer sees or experiences. Below the line is what IT sees and delivers from a service portfolio perspective. This is a nice slide to help everybody sort of understand what's happening over time. It's pretty easy to work with. Okay, so 21 minutes, not too bad to get through that part. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to show you what we've got in new highlights and improvements in the ever-evolving service portal.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. Share the screen here. So I'm going to start first with kind of the presentation of that service taxonomy that Don listed, or that service listing, kind of from a consumer perspective. So I'm in our self-service portal built on ServiceNow's content management system. From here, the user can go to the service catalog. And this is going to provide, a view to the services that are provided to the, provided by the organization to the consumer. And, kind of the purpose for displaying some of these is to provide both the transparency to the customer, kind of clarify expectations, but also provide a vehicle or avenue by which the user can request the services they want to use. So on this page, they can kind of browse through the different services from the service taxonomy or the groupings and categories. They can also kind of toggle and look at services that are specifically tied or delivered directly to that individual. And these are, whereas I'm a subscriber, which are either individually subscribed or kind of via my department or my group, I'm listed as a subscriber for these specific services. Another option I have in here is I can also look at looking at ratings and looking at feedback to services and kind of sifting through what are the services that are highest rated, as well as go in and provide my own feedback and rating to services as I consume and use those. As I'd expect, obviously, sifting through the services, I can always do a search. I can browse kind of through A to Z to kind of look for my various services. And I might also look for services kind of via keywords, right? So I can search for something like VPN, or I could search for a product name, or some other keyword that might take me to the service, because there might be multiple ways to term and phrase those services, and we want to make it as easy to come and find which are the appropriate service information based off of how the users interact and look for information. Let me go back for a moment. So I'm going to go back to our service taxonomy for a moment here, and I'll dig into one of these categories. So we'll go into Business Applications Finance. And Don mentioned in the screenshot SAP Financial, so I'll show you that directly in the system. So this provides me a view into this particular service. I can see the ratings. As I said, I can see who owns it. I also see that I am a current subscriber to this service. But more importantly, I can kind of see what is the service, what can I expect from it, what's in scope, what's out of scope, what's its current health, how has it performed over the last 5 days, where I can provide my feedback, as well as if there's any other supplemental information that is helpful for me as a consumer to interact with the service. Maybe this is tutorials, knowledge articles on getting started, or other relevant information that might help me maximize my use of this particular service. So also notice I can also request this service, right? So when I go to request this service, this is where I would kickstart my process of ordering, getting access, and becoming a subscriber of this particular service. Let me show you one other service as an example. So I'll go to bond trading. And one kind of subtle difference on this one is this one actually has varying offerings, which are kind of services inside of a service. And some of the key points with this is you'll see a bond trade in New York versus bond trade in London. They might have price differences in terms of the offerings. You know, this could be your gold, silver, platinum packages. But they also, more importantly, define what are those commitments and targets that we are managing to in terms of delivering the quality of service that we agree to with our customers. These might be availability. You might see in these cases response time. They might just be various attributes you can expect to get with the service, certain amount of storage, certain amount of capabilities, and so forth. So one other page in here. So also as a consumer, I showed you from an individual service perspective, seeing kind of the health of the SAP service, but I can also look at this from a more macro view of what's the service health across all of our services that I consume. I can see outages and alerts, current issues, any kind of planned maintenance activities coming up. I can also kind of look down and see the health of our services in this dashboard view, and I kind of noticed that our EDI service has currently been down for a couple of days now, and might explain why some of our experiences or issues with our vendors' integration systems might not be working as we expect. So one other thing I want to kind of show is just a slightly different perspective in terms of a different look at the same kind of information. So this is another portal built in the same environment, just with different styles and but the same data behind the scenes. But to kind of give you the idea, obviously you can present this in a way that is most appealing to your consumers and maybe matches your corporate culture and how you kind of want to present your information to your customers. One of the things that's a little different in this one is there is an aspect of, for those things that are common questions or common, kind of requests that are associated with these services, we kind of group those under the I want to section. So I can quickly look for things like getting access or setting up my email on my computer, maybe getting my voicemail set up. There might be a common service-related question in terms of the voice services that we provide. But also might also be some requestable things like getting actual software, and the software distribution might be a common service question that we want to kind of highlight here in the I want to. Also further in the services area, this is just another shortcut to some of that same service grouping, service taxonomy, and kind of takes us to the same views we saw before, but obviously in a different portal perspective. I can look at, say, business applications under my services, and I can drill in further into finance and kind of find my same SAP service, right? And kind of the same information presented here, and I can still request this. All right, so that kind of covered what I wanted to cover as far as the consumer perspective. Let's also talk now about kind of what does a service author, service owner see. So I'm going to go into kind of the native UI of ServiceNow, and let's look at some of these service records. So I'll go into business services. And I'll just pull up laptop support. So now, obviously we're in kind of an edit view or a, definition view of creating these service records. And so some of the same information you saw from the consumer is here as well, in that, we name our service, for our service life cycle, what stage is it in the life cycle? It's currently in an operational stage. Who owns it? Its criticality. As far as the linkages of the service to those taxonomy trees, that's right here under this classification. And you'll see this is where we can open up our trees and see the different layers of classification and categorization. I'm not going to move it, but that's where I would go to change my my classification of where this is organized and defined. Further, I can come down here and define my different offerings. So maybe executive laptop support, for example, and then here's where I might define some price differences between one offering versus the other, kind of the units by which they're priced, maybe per month, per annual, or per service. And then here's where I get to my different service commitments in terms of, in this case, some of these are attributes in terms of we provide virus protection, and some of these are measurable commitments such as resolution time that'll be tied back to incidents and our performance on incidents. So just to, let's go through the life cycle of this, if we may. I'm going to go create a new service, just so you can kind of see the pieces in action. So I'm going to create a new one called WebEx. So this is our WebEx service. I'll just kind of conference room service. I'll just briefly describe it at this point. Under my classification, this is going to go under communication, collaboration, voice, and video. My price per unit is going to be monthly. And I think for now, I'll just put a picture to it just so it presents a little more cleanly. I'll throw my little WebEx logo on it. And we'll save this record. And I'm just going to make one offering for this. Now, I could have multiple different offerings. I'll just say this is my standard offering, and maybe it's $20 per month for the service. And then I can kind of pick from my list of service subscriptions. So let's do kind of a resolution target of this and an availability target of XYZ. Now, you notice I'm picking from kind of existing service commitments. So you kind of have a catalog of commitments that you can define and reuse and attach to your different service offerings and services in general, but also you can define new ones, right? So there might be cases where in our WebEx service there's something unique about the WebEx service and the commitments that we provide there to necessitate something new to add to the catalog. So it took a moment to kind of make that association, because one of the things it's doing in this process is actually going out and retroactively computing our measurements against these now commitments to see if this, what's the actual current adherence to these commitments on this new service. All right, so that covers our service and our offering. Next thing I'm going to do is actually create a kind of item, a requestable item that we can use for the users to kind of request access to this particular service, so a way to kind of request and subscribe to this particular service. So I'm just going to kind of duplicate some of that information. We'll do a catalog item here called request WebEx access. So this is going to be a way for the customers to come in here and request our particular service, and I'll show you in a second. I'll attach this to our service. I'm just going to fill in some information on this. I'll categorize this the same way. And I'll just let's do image, same image, just so it looks good. And I'll just WebEx service. Obviously, I would want to make them more descriptive for the users so they can understand what they're getting, but for now, I'll just kind of keep the description relatively blank. So the other thing I'm going to do here is I've already got a standard kind of access request workflow that I'm going to attach to this, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. So in this workflow, kind of if this didn't cover my needs, then what I would do is I'd go out here and create either a new workflow, or I'd copy this workflow and make my adjustments to it. But in my particular case, this standard workflow meets my needs in that it goes through a initial manager approval, which is the manager of the requester. If approved, then it moves on to a setup access task. That once that's done, then it moves on to a confirmation and kind of communication task to the requester. If denied, then the overall request is canceled and closed, and the user would have to resubmit. So this kind of meets my needs, so I've attached this to my request to handle my fulfillment workflow for this. And then the last thing I want to do here is, if I can type right, I'm going to go back to my service, and I'm going to link these two things together. So I'm going to have my WebEx service, and I'm going to say, here is how you request it. All right, so now I've got my service definition and my request. So now when I go out back to my portal, and we'll go to our service catalog, under communication and collaboration, if I look under voice and web video, now I've got a WebEx service. And the other thing you'll notice here too, now I don't have a lot of information about the service. Obviously, it would make sense to define more information about this service so people understand what it is. But the other thing you'll notice is the newly added. So as we publish new services or we author new versions, we're also communicating those to these consumers out here in this little sidebar as to what's new, what's happening in terms of our service portfolio adjustments. So let's go ahead and request this service, and I'll show you how the workflow works. So I'm going to order this. I need to set up conference calls with customers. All right, so we'll place our order. And then as a customer, I can track the status of this order. I can see it's kind of moving along. But let me kind of show you behind the scenes of this workflow in process. So we'll go to our request record. And I can see here, if I were to launch my workflow, I'd see it's kind of in a pending approval state. Right, so it's awaiting approval of my manager, Don Casson. And so let me just go in as Don, and we'll approve it really quickly. And I'll just do this via the portal as well. So Don can come out to the portal. He can go look at his pending approvals. He sees someone's asking for request access to WebEx. Of course, he approves it. And now we'll toggle back and look at this thing in the next step. I'll go back to my request. So now I can see it is approved, and it generated that first catalog or that first task to set up the access. So just to finish this out, we'll close that task out, which then spawns our next task to the service desk to confirm the access and use. All right, so we close that out. And now my stage and my state of my request are closed and complete. And as a consumer, if I were to come out to my status screen, my WebEx request is no longer my active request. It's now listed in my kind of closed area, and I see it's gone through all of its stages in completeness. And kind of the last leg of this, because this is tied to that WebEx service, the other thing that happens in here is when I go to my services, now I'm going to see that WebEx service is now one of these services that I am a subscriber to, because as part of that fulfillment activities, it's registered me as a subscriber, and now we'll communicate any updates or lifecycle changes as it pertains to this particular service. So that was kind of wraps up what I'd hoped to cover today. And I appreciate the time, and I hope this was helpful in terms of sparking some thoughts about both the customer portal and the service definition aspects of ServiceNow.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. So let's okay, I'm waiting. That's good. Is that full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So if you found this interesting and wonder what might be a logical next step, here are a few options for you. If you're interested in this advanced employee self-service catalog and portal, it's available as a self-service demo now. You can get your own login on our website, follow the front page banner, and you can play with it to your heart's content. If you're looking for a better way to organize and categorize services, you can access a short demo video of our Service Taxonomy mind map application on our website. And those screenshots I showed you today are from that. Or perhaps you're considering a broader service catalog initiative but aren't sure where to start. We find a lot of customers take advantage of this. We have a one-day private service catalog workshop which we run on your site for up to 15 employees or attendees. It's designed to educate your team, uncover key business drivers and roadblocks, and create a common language and direction to get your team on the same page. You can literally save months of effort in consensus building and get your program moving. We feel like it's a really good value, and it's less than $4,000, and it includes the travel. And for us, it's a great way to engage with you guys, get to know you, and you can see what it is we know and what we're about. So that's all I've got to cover from that standpoint, and we can now open it up to the questions that have come in, Stephanie.
Okay, great. Jeff, if I could ask you to pull up your demo environment again, please. I've got a question specifically about your top-level navigation there. So across the top, exactly, it says the request incident, etc. Got a question that says, can you tell me the difference between request and service catalog in this system as based upon your top-level navigation bar?
Yeah, so in this situation, our request, and some of this is, I should say that in some cases you may make certain users available or make certain options or areas of this portal available to some users and not to others. But the difference for us in this situation is the service catalog area that I kind of went in before kind of hits on service portfolio, the service definition, and the request area is is our kind of other way, or kind of the shopping area of being able to request goods and services. The reality is both of them are tied to the same service taxonomy in terms of grouping of items. But it's kind of two ways to get to. I can either go through the request route and order and shop for an item directly, like my access to WebEx, or I can look at my service definitions and what those services are, and then request those services from the service catalog or service portfolio. It is our intention. There's a little bit of confusion around, obviously it was highlighted in here of the two different areas. It is our plan, and we have some activities underway to try to make that a kind of a simpler way to get to this kind of the same purpose.
Yeah, and to add on to that a little bit, you know, in the service catalog, you can have services like, let's say, email, where everyone gets it. You don't have to request it, but it's going to show you things like the service health. It's going to show you the service owner. It's going to show you the service commitments, all those kinds of things, which you don't necessarily want to see maybe the same way in a request format. So it's a little bit different from that perspective. We also have linkage, you know, where there are some services that are optional, and you might want to request it, like that example of the SAP.
Okay. Jeff, this question came in during your demo, so I'll start with you, though I think Don might want to weigh in. How does one prevent service overwhelm?
Well, maybe let Don answer that first. I mean, I don't know if that's a ServiceNow challenge, because you can certainly add as many services you want in ServiceNow. Obviously, I think the key element is making sure we don't overwhelm our customers and our consumers. And I think a lot of things that we try to do in this is making sure that these portals and the customer experience, you know, is contextually relevant to the user, that, you know, and it's simple, so we're only providing services or items that are relevant to their job function and their duties. So, you know, even if you've got thousands of services, chances are only a handful of those are really applicable to certain audiences and certain users, and I think that's kind of the challenge, is trying to figure out how we can present that in a simple way to those consumers.
So, I mean, that's a very good point, Jeff. The other part of it is it does take work to create and maintain a service, right? So it's not without effort, and as a result of that, you know, you've got only so many units of production you can use. It's pretty common to find that the demand you have for services exceeds your ability to create and deliver them. And when that's the case, that demand front end helps you rank in a quantifiable way and communicate that same, you know, to the customer base that's interested in service activity. So, I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. The other thing, there's a couple of principles we have in the process, and one of them is, you know, is when you start to, if you create services as building blocks and manage them as CIs, you can have reusable componentry, and then you can create variations of things more easily from those configuration items than you can by single threading every service. So the first principle, when there's a request for a new service that seems like a viable request, is how can we not create a new service? Right? Is there an existing service we can modify very slightly, or perhaps we could take that service and change it a little bit and then make it a different service, but our goal is to not create more services for exactly this reason. It's complex enough as it is.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question, Jeff, how would a service taxonomy be influenced or driven by the organizational or operational structure of a company, if at all?
Don, you want to field that one? You want me to do it?
Yes. Yes, I would say very heavily, actually. If you look at something like the line of business services that are offered, that in the categorization of those things, it's obvious, it's very clear. If you look at the IT and the shared services, they're probably pretty similar industry to industry. At least that's what we'll be seeing. But what comes into play, and it's different every place we go, is where's the greatest pain? What are the most common needs? Now, there is commonality. And then, to some degree, how much is the organization or the provider organization trying to put its stamp on the customer experience versus driving that experience from the customer's desire and needs? And this is a very, very common, tough problem. You know, we'll have a circumstance where we're talking to facilities, right? And we hear this, well, the facilities group needs to look like this. They've got to have this logo on it. This is their brand. And my response is that what the customer expects to see? And doesn't the customer see the brand as a company brand, not a facilities brand? So you can see there's a whole cultural impact, an issue of ownership, and a little proprietary nature of that comes into this whole configuration, this whole conversation about what does it mean when it gets to a place. But to, that was a very rambling answer, I apologize. But to wrap it up, in shared services and in IT, probably 70 to 80% the same. Line of business, very industry specific.
Yeah, and I guess something I would add to it is kind of echoing some of what Don pointed out is I think one of the key parts here is trying to look at this from a customer's lens and do they understand, do they understand the different lines of businesses and that these are different shared services or different kind of taxonomy branches, and is that in language that they understand? I mean, we may, from a back office fulfillment perspective, know that this is fulfilled by HR versus facilities or by sales or some other group. But if the customer doesn't necessarily, if the customer doesn't understand those nuances, then we want to present it in the most intuitive way for them, to where they don't get confused by the shopping experience or the navigation of services.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how important the visual service taxonomy is for making that work and maintaining your sanity over time in managing services. It makes it so much easier to see where they're missing, where they're overdone, and where you might have the same service on multiple different stubs of the taxonomy quite logically,
Jeff, while you've got your demo open here, I've got a request from someone to do a quick walkthrough of the knowledge section. At a high level, I do want to keep an eye on the time because I have a number of questions still queued up, but just to kind of show at a high level what might be in the knowledge section.
Sure. So, I mean, in the knowledge section, and again, as Don indicated in our slides, we would certainly encourage you guys to register and get access to this demo environment and play around as well. And this is just out-of-the-box demo knowledge content, but what you see here is starting with organization of our different topical areas of knowledge and kind of counts, of which I can then drill into these and see the details. There's also a, kind of pushing up of what items are currently trending and are popular based off of views and ratings. There is an element of this portal as you navigate and look at things, it keeps track of what things you've recently viewed. These are kind of my bookmarks, right? And I've got some options here to kind of quickly look for items and jump to, say, a knowledge article like this, right? Or I can also provide the feedback and updates, or as well kind of go through the search and look at it this way, right? One thing to know about this portal, it is fully responsive, so if you look at someone on an iPhone kind of rendering, you'll see they can still consume this information cleanly on an iPhone as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Don, I'm guessing probably start with you on this. The question is, can I also ask if you view the service portfolio and service catalog as different capabilities? I know lots of people use the term portfolio and catalog interchangeably.
Aha. In the last month, we did a webinar just on that topic. If you go look in our archives, you will see it. And yes. Resources. Oh, I'm sorry, the resources, not our archives. The resources page on our website. And it's a very common question. It's really quite simple though. The service catalog is what you're selling today. It's your active services at any time that you're offering to customers. The service portfolio is the full lifecycle management of a service from cradle to grave. And it could be active, it could be inactive. But that's where you keep that whole functionality as well as your governance, management, demand. That's your factory for building and maintaining and retiring services over their useful life.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, you mentioned CMDB in the slide deck. How is your service catalog tied to your CMDB, and what is your CMDB solution? Okay, so the CMDB, and as far as tying it from a solution standpoint, Jeff may want to speak to that technically, but at the highest order, a configuration management database is a repository of artifacts of things, right? It's some place where you can take an artifact, and it could be a service, it could be a process, it could be a piece of equipment, it could be a sub piece of equipment, it could be software, it could be just about anything you want. And it allows you to have an audit trail on the use and quality of that asset, how that asset gets deployed over time, right? It's almost like a tag that allows you to see it.
And so when we look at a service, what we're looking at here is the highest, if bond trading is a service, we're looking at the highest order of this functionality. And then there's all sorts of things underneath this service that are services, components, but they can all be tracked as CIs to deliver this service. And being able to understand, this can go quite far down, all the way down to the, core infrastructure componentry. And it's it's the tip of the iceberg is what we're looking at here, is the actual service delivered. And you can map this at a high level manually from this bond trading. Let's say there are 3 big applications underneath bond trading that deliver bond trading. Well, we know what those are, and we can identify them. It's pretty reliable. But you go much below that, and you're on all sorts of shifting sands as to the servers, the database, the network connectivity, the web servers, the storage, all those things, in virtualized or cloud-based worlds. You have to discover them at any given time to know what they actually are. Go ahead, Jeff, if you had something you want to add.
No, I think you said it well. I mean, I think the only other thing I would add to it, as far as some of the things I showed today, I did show the service health dashboard, and certainly some of those outages and some of your availability tracking to offerings. It's rarely are you going to necessarily create outages directly against the service. Typically, that's going to be to a component of the service. Say a server goes down, or your SAN goes down, a network router is down, right? Something like that. And it's those relationships between the components and your overall services that they support that kind of is where the CMDB, relationships and aspects to these business services really come into play in a lot of regards.
Absolutely. And, it's worth noting as well that configuration management, the CMDB, it's not a trivial thing. I mean, we all know it's a pretty hard thing to do effectively, and it takes some effort. That said, without it, you cannot have reliable service health. And so you cannot ensure the quality of your service delivery. And if you go all the way up to the customer, what are they looking for? They want it to be available all the time and fast, whatever it is, a service, and they want it to be delivered on the time you said with really exceptional quality consistently. Right? So that's not very hard.
Okay, great. Another question: what are examples of a professional service, and do the professional services belong in the CMDB?
So if the question references the taxonomy, in that section of the taxonomy, a professional service might be, that was a line of business part of the taxonomy. So there, let's say I'm a law firm. A professional service is legal consulting, right? And it could be billed by the hour. That's a service provided to the external customer, right? So that's what that might be an example of professional services. Or it could be services that go along with some kind of product that we're selling, right, to complete a solution for a customer. Right? And as far as a service being an item in the CMDB or CI, this service here, bond trading, well, it could be the training around bond trading, right? I'm just making it up. But that's a service delivered to a customer, and so it would be trackable. It's a component in configuration management, and it can be combined with other components to create other services, right? Or it could be a subcomponent, which you have to know its quality and availability to support this service. So I would say from a CI standpoint, don't worry so much about what it is as much as do we need to understand its state and quality.
Okay. Jeff, I think this question is probably for you. Do you find that by showing the service owner on the catalog, users bypass service desk and the request catalog?
Well, I don't think so. I think obviously we do want to kind of influence behavior by making the experience of the portal as user-friendly as can be, and make it as convenient as can be so people don't circumvent some of those desired processes. Obviously, I think having the service owner holds to the point where people know who to contact when there are issues and who to contact for service-related information, though I don't know that necessarily means that there's an open door, that service owner. I think ultimately you still want them to go through the proper channels to submit help and to chat with the service desk and so forth.
Yeah, and that's kind of why you don't see a button here that says email John now, right, in this particular screen. And yet, on the other hand, it's funny how you see the name of the service owner right below the rating. Okay? Well, we want high quality. If you put my name on a service, it's going to have my attention, right? So there's a quality factor there that this thing is trying to drive.
Got the question asking about whether the benefits of building a service catalog, I'm not scrolling very well here, building a service catalog using ServiceNow versus BMC, which has a strong CMDB tool.
Jeff, you can answer it, or I can answer it.
Why don't you take it first, Don? See if I can add to what you say.
Okay. Now this is from my perspective, okay? There are lots of ways to get home, okay? There are lots of ways to do things. Probably the premier strength of the ServiceNow solution is its architecture, right? It's a single data model. It's a stack that's unified all the way up and down. There's no third-party code in it. And it was designed from the get-go to be a form-space workflow engine that's really easy to move and change and add and delete and to move around. And so the answer, what all that says is, versus traditional client-server and monolithic integrated kind of things that you see, you can move very, very fast. You know, we can do, and I'm not, you know, versus past client-server technology we worked in, we can deliver things in a third, you know, to a quarter of the time from a technical standpoint, leveraging this platform. We had to change our consulting from waterfall to agile because it just wasn't fast enough to keep up with the rate of change that we could drive with this service, with this platform. And so in a way, it's almost like an accountable Lotus Notes on steroids underneath. It's a terrific platform. It just happens to focus on IT service management because that's what Fred Luddy knew, you know, from his days as Peregrine, the chief architect of Peregrine. But he always intended, or so he says, to build a platform for developing applications on. And so that would be, you know, in general, that's kind of the difference. I think the intent of the original design and architecture is completely different, and you've got kind of a multiple generational gap in the age of the platforms involved.
Jeff, anything to add to that?
No, that's what you said it well, Don. I mean, I will say that, you know, it's not on, you meant, part of the question mentioned strength of BMC, CMDB. I will say in a lot of regards, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? We're trying to, in a lot of cases, solve a particular business problem, which may be, you know, moving to a business service management kind of mentality and a customer-centric mentality. So in some cases, our projects may be to augment some of the existing solutions that may already be in place, right? So it may be leverage BMC, CMDB in conjunction with ServiceNow and build a portal on top of that, and you know, and ultimately solve the right problem. And as we've indicated in this kind of session, it's technology is part of the equation, but obviously people and process is another very large part of this equation as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, Jeff. Our goal is to get a good solution to the business problem as efficiently as we can. Right? We're not about the technology, we're about the business problem and solving it, and that's right. We also have customers with core HP technologies that are well developed and established, and then we integrate with those things and work on top of them because it doesn't make sense to replace it.
Great. We are coming up on the top of the hour, but I have a number of questions left. So for those of you who can stay on, I'll go ahead and read the questions, invite you to stay with us. Jeff, I have a question for you. Are you using monitoring software to capture the service outages on the service dashboard?
You know, in this particular demo environment, no, but you know, I think to do business service health effectively, you likely want, you know, we mentioned kind of CMDB and the relationships, you likely want some automation and technology to support those business, you know, building out those relationships to the service, as well as automation of detection of issues and alerts, right, from a monitoring tool. So I think the short answer is it's very common for us to see outage information that would be consumed on a dashboard to kind of originate from an integration with some of those monitoring tools.
Thanks, Jeff. Don, while the service taxonomy concept seems simple enough in principle, it sounds like it can get complex fast. Is that what you find?
Yes, that is absolutely true. A focused service taxonomy design effort can take 3 to 4 days easily of very, very hard work by a team of anywhere from 5 to 10 people to get that first version 80% right. But that's also a critical learning exercise, and it establishes a foundation for common understanding of how we might manage services, how we might make this, something we can actually succeed with. So yes, it's hard. Yes, it does take some serious time, but it's totally worth it, as nothing in phase one is even close to as critical as getting that taxonomy right.
Jeff, I've got a specific question asking which CMDB are you using behind this demo?
Behind this demo is the native ServiceNow CMDB. So with no integrations as far as automation goes, but I will say for a lot of our customers' environments, we'll have integrations with SCCM or Landesk for some of the desktop, laptop stuff. We might be using ServiceNow's discovery tools to build some of the data center-based relationships or integration with tools like HP Universal Discovery or BMC, Altria.
Okay, thank you. Is it best practice to create standard workflows such as the general access workflows shown during your demo, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, where possible, and Don kind of hit on this a little bit, where possible you kind of want to create these modular components, within ServiceNow, and that might be, a workflow that does a specific set of tasks. Maybe the approval workflow becomes its own kind of separate workflow. And one of the benefits you have in ServiceNow is you can build workflows that are sub-workflows to other workflows, and that's kind of a best practice where you can. One of the things that's coming with Fuji as well, or is here now with Fuji, is you have the ability to define kind of your own modular activity definitions as well, which is another way to kind of create some standard reusable components or modules, right? I will say we have seen customers that go the process of creating unique workflows for every catalog item that's requested, and at some point that's going to become unmanageable. And usually is a kind of a telling sign that there's lack of standards within their processes. So I think the goal with all this is to have some standards in how you fulfill and deliver your services, and have a ServiceNow solution that kind of mirrors that, where you can leverage common components.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. And if it's worth building as a process or service, it's worth putting in the platform. Because ultimately, we can't get automation, simplification, or get the people out of being the process if we don't technology enable it. I mean, that is really, really a critical issue. Otherwise, we'll have process that sits on the shelf, right, and gets the dust blown off it every now and then. So that's also where the componentization is critical. It should flow all the way down from that process to the workflow as an item, right? And they need to be tightly linked, because if we make a change to that process, we have to know, or we have to automate that change to the technology, right? We've got to make sure those stay synchronized. If we have a taxonomy map that we build and maintain in this visual workspace, we have to synchronize that with our taxonomy map that's in our actual technology, right? So that's the real power of this, to ultimately eliminate work and to automate things and make things faster and better, is that tight linkage.
Okay, one last question, Jeff, again about the portal. How should multiple service taxonomies and enterprise services be presented to a consumer in the portal?
You're kind of breaking up on me, but I think you were talking about multiple service taxonomies or enterprise services presented to a customer. Okay.
Yes, how should they be presented to the consumer in the portal?
Okay. Yeah, good question. So I'm kind of assuming that when we talk multiple service taxonomies, we're kind of talking like how Don listed shared services, maybe HR, legal, finance, kind of versus IT, and kind of how that would be best consumed from a portal perspective. I think ideally we kind of said this a little bit. I think ideally you want to display information that is relevant to the customer. So, if possible, their immediate view might be those services that are specifically offered or applicable to them as a consumer. If we can't profile or drive that level of presentation, then, I think what's common, or we see pretty commonly, is starting with kind of that top level service catalog as a navigation component. Maybe first choosing human resources, and then seeing the human resources service categories they're under, and then ultimately getting to those services that are specific to that human resources grouping.
Okay, I did have one more question come in. Don, you talked about the three constituents of a service: customer, provider, and manager. How do we make sure all of their needs are accounted for systematically?
Okay.
Yes.
Yep, I get it.
Okay.
Well, and that actually, the part of that goes to this point of taking the process and putting it in the technology. And that's what has essentially eluded us before the cloud, before the SaaS platforms that were really very, very flexible. Right? Was getting it into the flow so that the process, the governance, and the task arrive at the point of work together. And the process is built in, the governance is built in, right? And then the work is built in. So, I mean, it's really a beautiful combination of these things. So the systematic outcome for the managers is driven primarily by the service portfolio, which defines service governance, accountability, and lifecycle, and that's kind of that phase 2 activity we talked about, the services factory, right? That's that enterprise factory approach. The customer's outcome is driven by having a beautiful service portal, a consistent service design approach or package so that services look the same, right, across the portal, and then governance that delivers high-quality outcomes on time. That's, if you only had 2 KPIs from the customer's perspective, would be, was it a great experience every time, and was it on time? You could manage your customer-focused part of the business probably from those 2 KPIs. The provider's outcome is driven by consistent service design, just like the customer, and simplifying and automating the flow of work. Remember, thereafter, effectiveness and efficiency. So that's how we would sort of systematically, deliver those 3 outcomes against this phased approach.
Okay. I think that does it for us. I want to thank everyone for hanging on over the hour here. We appreciate it. You will receive a recording link as well as a link to the slides from me by tomorrow midday. So thank you, and we look forward to having you on a future event.